The insistent buzz of a phone vibrated against the sterile quiet of the room, a sound as out of place as a scream in a library. It was Sarah's. Derek's name glowed on the screen, a beacon of betrayal in the dim, clinical light. At that exact moment, our 5-year-old son, Tommy, wretched violently, a horrific stream of blood and bile spewing from his small mouth into the pink plastic basin I held. His body convulsed with the effort, each heave a hammer blow against my own ribs. The phone buzzed again, relentless and demanding. The air was thick with the chemical burn of antiseptic, a smell that had long ago burrowed into my sinuses and taken up permanent residence. It was the scent of bleached floors, rubbing alcohol, and a faint, cloying sweetness I couldn't identify, but would forever associate with fear. Around us, the machines that were supposed to be saving Tommy's life kept their own cold, mechanical rhythm. The IV drip ticked with maddening slowness, while the heart monitor beeped out a steady, electronic countdown, each pulse a second stolen from our son's future. It was a symphony of impending loss, and I was its unwilling conductor. My chest felt like it was encased in concrete, each breath a struggle. I watched Sarah, my wife, as her thumb hovered over the glowing green answer icon on her phone. Every instinct in me screamed for her to drop the damn thing, to reach for Tommy's hand, to offer a word of comfort to the small, trembling boy who was fighting a war inside his own cells. But she didn't. Her focus was entirely on the screen. Her world shrunk to that single point of contact with another man, while her son, our son, was vomiting his life into a plastic tub. The choice was being made right there, in the space of that hesitation. A fresh wave of panic washed over me, cold and sharp. It wasn't just the cancer, the chemo, the blood. It was the email I'd read this morning, the one now seared into my brain. The insurance company's final notice. We had 48 hours to get the authorization for the next round of treatment submitted and approved. 48 hours, or they would drop his coverage completely, citing some bureaucratic loophole about pre-existing conditions and experimental therapies. Without it, we were finished. The timer wasn't just on the monitor, it was on our entire life. She stood up, the legs of her chair scraping against the linoleum. With a final, apologetic glance at me, not at Tommy, she stepped into the hallway, pulling the door almost closed behind her. Her voice, when it came, was a low, conspiratorial whisper, but in the tense silence of the chemo ward, it carried like a shout. "I miss you too," she murmured, the words twisting a knife in my gut. I looked down at Tommy. His eyes, wide and glassy with fever and pain, were fixed on the door. He clutched my sleeve with a weak hand. "Daddy," he whispered, his voice raspy. "Why did Mommy leave?" I couldn't answer him. The words lodged in my throat, a knot of grief and rage. Her casual betrayal in the face of our son's agony was a line I never imagined could be crossed. Something inside me, something that had been pleading and hoping and trying to hold our fractured family together, finally snapped. The despair didn't vanish, but it crystallized into something hard and sharp. Resolve. I gently squeezed Tommy's hand, smoothed his sweat-damp hair back from his forehead, and waited for the nurse to come in and unhook the chemo bag. Once he was settled and drifting into an exhausted sleep, I walked out of the room, my footsteps echoing with a purpose I hadn't felt in months. I dug into my worn messenger bag, my fingers bypassing the spare clothes and Tommy's favorite dinosaur book, until they closed around the crisp envelope from the insurance company. I smoothed the letter out on the stark white windowsill of the waiting area, pulled out my phone, and took a steady, clear photograph of the damning paragraph citing their denial. Then, I dialed our family attorney's number. "Bill, it's Marcus," I said, my voice low but firm. "I need to see you. Now? It's about Sarah. I need to file for an emergency modification to our custody arrangement. It's a matter of medical neglect and child endangerment. She's actively sabotaging our son's care." I listened for a moment, my eyes fixed on the door to Tommy's room. "I have proof she's putting him at risk. I'm on my way." She was still leaning against the wall down the hall when I returned, a faint, dreamy smile on her face as she texted. The sight of it, so soon after our son had coughed up blood, made my own blood run cold. I walked straight up to her, planting myself between her and her phone, forcing her to look up at me. Her smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of annoyance. "What, Marcus?" Before she could launch into an excuse or a lie, I laid out the new reality. "You have 12 hours, Sarah," I said, keeping my voice level, devoid of the inferno raging inside me. "That's how long you have to choose. You can have him." I jerked my chin in the general direction of the world outside the hospital, the world where Derek existed. "Or you can have our son. You can't have both. By noon tomorrow, I need to know you've cut off all contact with him and are 100% committed to saving Tommy. If not, the conversation we have next will be with my attorney." She stared at me, her mouth falling open slightly before twisting into a sneer of disbelief. "Don't be dramatic, Marcus," she scoffed, tucking her phone into her back pocket as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. "It's not some silly game. My relationship with Derek has nothing to do with Tommy." "It has everything to do with him," I countered, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "He was vomiting blood and you walked out to take a call from your boyfriend. That has everything to do with him. 12 hours. Her dismissive laugh followed me as I turned my back on her and walked toward the administrative wing. The rage was a fuel now, propelling me forward. If she wouldn't help, if she was actively working against us, I had to know what our options were. I found the hospital's financial counseling office and walked in without an appointment. A kind-faced woman with a nameplate that read Mrs. Albright listened patiently as I explained the looming insurance deadline. "I understand," she said, her expression sympathetic. "Let's pull up his account and see what we're looking at for the next treatment cycle if you have to pay out of pocket. We can discuss payment plans, charity applications." Her voice trailed off as she typed, her brow furrowing. "That's odd," she murmured, clicking her mouse a few more times. "What is it?" I asked, my stomach tightening again. She turned the monitor toward me. "According to our records, a payment was made from your joint savings account yesterday. A significant one. But it wasn't made to the hospital. It was a wire transfer. The funds were redirected." I stared at the screen, the banking details swimming before my eyes. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Redirected where?" The counselor looked uncomfortable. "To a business account, D Enterprises LLC. Derek. She had drained our savings. Not for a shopping spree, not for a vacation. She had funneled the money we had scraped together for our son's life or death treatment directly into her lover's business. Yesterday, while I was holding Tommy's hand, she was securing her future with him. The counselor was saying something about fraud protection and contacting the bank, but I couldn't hear her over the roaring in my ears. I stumbled out of her office, leaning against the hallway wall to catch my breath. The betrayal was absolute, a scorched earth campaign against our child and me. It wasn't just neglect. It was sabotage. I looked at the large digital clock hanging over the nurse's station, its red numbers glowing with brutal clarity. 4:17 p.m. The money was gone. The insurance was set to expire. And the window for Tommy's next round of high-dose chemotherapy, the round the doctors said was his best and perhaps final chance, was closing. Dr. Chen had been explicit. The treatment had to begin by midnight tomorrow to have any hope of working. The clock wasn't just ticking anymore, it was mocking me. The 12-hour ultimatum I'd given Sarah felt like a joke from another lifetime. It was obsolete the moment I walked out of the financial counselor's office. She hadn't just made her choice, she'd liquidated it, cashing in our son's future for a fresh start with Derek. There was no going back, no negotiation to be had. As I drove away from the hospital, the city lights blurred into streaks of indifferent color. I wasn't driving home, we no longer had one. I was driving to the apartment that had been our home, the place where I'd assembled Tommy's crib and painted the walls of his room a cheerful sky blue. I still had my key. I didn't know what I expected to find, but I knew I couldn't let her monstrous act of theft go unanswered. I needed to see her face when she was forced to account for it, not as a distant voice on the phone, but as a co-conspirator standing in the ruins of the life she'd torched. Each red light felt like a personal affront, a delay in the inevitable, grim confrontation that awaited me. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles were white mountains on a pale ridge. I was operating on something beyond anger now, a cold, clear engine of absolute necessity. Tommy's life depended not on his mother's compassion, but on my ability to fight back against her. I let myself into the apartment with my old key, the click of the lock sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet building. The air hit me first. It was wrong. Our shared scent of vanilla laundry detergent and my sandalwood soap was gone, completely erased and replaced by the sharp, cloying sweetness of Derek's cologne. It hung in the air like a fog, an invasive presence that had settled into the very fabric of the place. Then I saw the boxes. They were stacked in the living room, emblazoned with the logo of a moving company. But it was the bedroom, our bedroom, that delivered the final, visceral blow. The door was ajar, and I pushed it open. Our bed was still there, but half of the closet was empty, and new, unpacked moving boxes were piled against the far wall. His clothes were already hanging next to hers. A sleek, modern watch case sat on his side of the bed, where my worn copy of a thriller had rested just a week ago. She hadn't just left. She had moved him in, overlaying his existence onto the ghost of mine without a moment's hesitation. She was building a new nest before the old one was even cold, using the money meant for our dying son as her down payment. A throat cleared behind me, and I turned. Derek was leaning against the kitchen doorway, a smirk playing on his lips. He was the physical embodiment of the cologne, slick, confident, and utterly pleased with himself. He held a black coffee mug in one hand, cradling it like a trophy. As he took a slow, deliberate sip, he angled the mug so I could read the cheerful white text emblazoned across it. World's best stepdad. The message was so audacious, so profoundly cruel in its timing and context, that for a moment I could only stare, speechless. It wasn't just a mug, it was a declaration of war. It was a calculated jab meant to unman me, to establish his dominance in the territory he had so thoroughly conquered. He was gloating. Here, in the heart of my former life, surrounded by the evidence of his victory, he was mocking my son's suffering and my own loss. The smirk widened as he saw the impact land. He was enjoying this, drinking in my shock and pain like the coffee in his tasteless celebratory cup. "Looks like your husband's having a bit of a breakdown, babe," Derek said, his voice oozing a false, casual concern directed over my shoulder at Sarah, who now appeared behind him in the kitchen's shadow. "He just let himself in." Sarah stepped forward, moving to stand slightly behind Derek, as if using him as a shield. Her expression wasn't apologetic or even nervous. It was hard, defensive. "He's not my husband anymore, Derek," she corrected, the words sharp and final. The legal papers hadn't even been filed, but in her mind, I was already an artifact of a past life. The fury I'd been holding in check finally broke free, but it came out as ice, not fire. "You emptied our savings account," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "The money for Tommy's treatment. You wired it to him." Sarah actually flinched, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from her. Derek, however, just shrugged. "It was a business investment," he said smoothly. "A bridge loan. You have to be smart with assets, Marcus. I'm building a future for her, which is more than you've been able to do." I ignored him, my eyes locked on Sarah. "A future? What future, Sarah? The doctors gave him a 48-hour window. The insurance is gone. That money was his only chance." "Don't you dare try to guilt me with that," she snapped, her voice rising. "This is what you do. You make everything about the illness, about money. You don't think I'm suffering too?" "I think," I said, my voice cutting her off, "that Tommy barely knows you exist anymore. He asks why you left while he's hooked up to an IV. But I see you've adapted just fine." She tossed her head back, her face a mask of bitter resentment. "Kids adapt faster than broken men," she spat. The silence that fell in the wake of her words was a physical thing. It filled the room, pressing in on my eardrums, heavier and more suffocating than the stench of Derek's cologne. It was a vacuum where all the love, history, and shared hope we once had was just extinguished, leaving nothing behind. Derek's smug expression and Sarah's defiant glare seemed to warp and distort in the crushing quiet. They were a unified front, two predators who had successfully cut their prey from the herd and were now admiring their work. In that moment, they were more alien to me than strangers on the street. I looked from her face to his, and I finally understood. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to fight for here. The battle for Sarah was long over. The battle for Tommy had just begun. That single, vicious sentence, "Kids adapt faster than broken men," was a gift. It severed the final, threadbare cord of attachment I had to the woman I married. The silence she left in her wake didn't just sting. It cut deeper and inflicted a more profound, lasting pain than any of the dozens of IV needles and chemo ports our son had been forced to endure. It was the sound of the end. I drove back to the hospital in a daze, her final, cruel words echoing in the confines of my car. Kids adapt faster than broken men. She had passed judgment, delivered her verdict on my grief and my worth, and in doing so, had set me free. The confrontation hadn't given me the satisfaction of seeing her repent, but it had given me something far more valuable: clarity. The war had two fronts. The first, for Sarah's soul, was a catastrophic loss. The second, for Tommy's life, was now my solitary mission. There was no one else. No partner, no co-signer, no safety net. There was only me, a ticking clock, and the dregs of a savings account that she had plundered for her new life. When I walked back into the hushed, antiseptic air of the oncology ward, the weight of that reality pressed down on me. I eased into the chair by Tommy's bed, the vinyl sighing under my weight. He was asleep, his small face peaceful for once, the harsh lines of pain softened by whatever grace sleep afforded him. His chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm that belied the chaos raging in his blood. I watched him, memorizing the curve of his cheek, the way his eyelashes brushed against his skin. The red numbers on the monitor across the room glowed. 9:32 p.m. The midnight deadline for tomorrow loomed, a vertical wall of impossibility. I had no money. I had no plan. I had nothing but the sheer, desperate will to not let him down. I rested my head in my hands, the rough texture of my palms a stark contrast to the sterile smoothness of everything around me. I was broken. Maybe she was right about that, but I was still here. My phone buzzed on the bedside table, and my head snapped up. An unknown number with the hospital's exchange. My heart seized, my mind instantly cataloging every worst-case scenario. A complication. A reaction to the last round. The cancer was advancing faster than they thought. I fumbled for the phone, my thumb slipping twice before I managed to answer. "Hello?" I breathed, my voice tight. "Marcus? It's Dr. Chen. I hope I'm not calling too late. Do you have a minute to talk?" His voice was calm, professional, but that did nothing to soothe the frantic jackhammering in my chest. Doctors didn't call at almost 10 o'clock at night with trivialities. "Dr. Chen, yes, is everything okay? Is it Tommy?" I stood up, pacing the small space at the foot of the bed, as if I could outrun whatever bad news was coming. "Everything is okay, Marcus. Better than okay, actually. That's why I'm calling." I stopped pacing. "Better? What do you mean?" "I was reviewing his latest blood panels from this afternoon's session," he began, and I could hear the rustle of papers, a sound that usually filled me with dread. "His white cell counts, the blast numbers. Marcus, he's responding to the chemo. It's early, and we have to be cautious. But the response is more aggressive and positive than we had dared to hope for. The chemo is working. It's hitting the leukemia hard." I sank back into the chair, the phone pressed hard against my ear. "It's working?" The words felt foreign in my mouth. For months, every update had been a carefully worded preparation for the worst. We'd been fighting a losing battle, buying time in brutal, punishing increments. "Yes, which brings me to my other piece of news, the real reason I'm calling you tonight." He paused, and the silence stretched for a heartbeat. "Marcus, we found a donor." The world tilted on its axis. I gripped the armrest of the chair to steady myself. "A donor?" I whispered, unsure if I had heard him correctly. "For the transplant. But you said the odds were astronomical. I know, but we found one. A young man in Germany registered on the international database. He's a 9 out of 10 marker match. It's as close to a miracle as our science gets." A sob escaped my throat. A raw, strangled sound. Hope so long a stranger came rushing back in a tidal wave, overwhelming and powerful. It was so intense it almost hurt. "A match," I repeated, the words tasting of salvation. "So, what does this mean? What do we do?" "It means the game has changed," Dr. Chen said, his voice imbued with a new energy. "The bone marrow transplant is no longer a distant fantasy. It's our primary objective. It's our cure. But he needs to be strong enough to receive it. He needs to be in remission. That's why this next round of chemo, the one starting tomorrow, is the most critical of his life. It's our bridge to the transplant. We have to hit the leukemia with everything we have, get him into remission, and get him ready. The timeline is tight, but we can do this, Marcus." After I hung up, I couldn't move. I sat there, phone clutched in my hand, staring at my sleeping son as tears streamed down my face. A donor, a cure, a future. The words spun in my mind, weaving a new tapestry of possibility. In that moment, a vision bloomed in my mind, so clear and vivid it felt like a memory of something that hadn't happened yet. I saw myself, 6 months from now, holding Tommy's hand. He was wearing a small blue backpack, his hair grown back thick and brown, and he was walking, not into a chemo ward, but through the bright red doors of a kindergarten classroom. I saw the unadulterated joy on his face as he spotted a friend, the healthy, vibrant energy in his step. I saw a life for him, a whole life, filled with scraped knees, birthday parties, little league games, and terrible school photos. And as that beautiful future solidified in my mind, another, darker vision took its place. I saw Sarah, standing in the apartment she had stolen, I saw Derek. His charm curdled now that the money was gone. I saw overdue bills piling up on the counter, followed by collections calls, then stern, official-looking letters with red text. I saw a foreclosure notice taped to the door, the final consequence of a foundation built on theft and betrayal. Her short-term gain for a long-term desolation. The thought brought me no joy, only a grim sense of cosmic balance. Her path was her own. Mine was here with my son. The vision didn't just give me hope, it gave me a sword. The obstacle was the same, the money, but the stakes were no longer about merely surviving another week. They were about seizing a cure. I didn't hesitate. I pulled up the number for my company's 401k administrator. It was late, but they had a 24-hour hotline for a reason. An automated system gave way to a live human being with a tired voice. "Hello? You've reached the Retirement Services Hardship Withdrawal line. How can I help you?" "My name is Marcus Thorne," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I need to liquidate my entire 401k account, immediately." There was a pause on the other end. "Sir, I can certainly start that process for you, but I am legally required to inform you of the significant financial penalties. There's a 10% early withdrawal penalty on top of being taxed as ordinary income. You could lose nearly half the value of your account." "I understand," I said. "It doesn't matter." "Sir, this is your retirement savings. Liquidating the entire amount is a very extreme step. Have you considered a loan against the account instead?" His voice was laced with practiced concern. "A loan won't be enough," I said, looking at Tommy. I thought of the kindergarten doors. "And my retirement is sitting right here in this bed. I need every cent you can give me. I need you to wire the entire post-penalty amount directly to the Pediatric Oncology Financial Department at City General Hospital. I have the account and routing number right here." I gave him the details Mrs. Albright had provided. There was more clicking, more typing. "Okay, Mr. Thorne. I've initiated the full liquidation and the wire transfer. You'll get an email confirmation within the hour. The funds should be available to the hospital by morning." The finality in his tone was matched by my own relief. I had done it. I had sacrificed my future to purchase his. It was the best deal I had ever made. The confirmation email arrived at 3:14 a.m., a sterile, automated message that nonetheless felt like a holy scripture. The funds from my 401k, my entire future, had been successfully wired and received by the hospital. A profound, bone-deep calm settled over me. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I had a foothold. I had wrested back a small measure of control from the chaos. Later that morning, as the sun streamed into Tommy's room, I watched my son eat a few spoonfuls of yogurt, a small victory that felt monumental. The hope ignited by Dr. Chen's call was no longer a frantic, flickering spark. It was a steady flame. With the transplant now a tangible goal and the bridging treatment secured, my purpose was singular. I stepped into the hallway and called my attorney again. "Bill, it's Marcus," I said, my voice resolute. "It's done. The next round of treatment is fully funded." I could almost hear his relief through the phone. "That's incredible news, Marcus, truly. Now, about the emergency hearing. I've filed the motion, citing medical and financial endangerment. The judge will want to see a clear pattern. You mentioned she drained the savings?" "Every penny," I confirmed. "Wired it straight to her boyfriend's business account." Bill let out a low whistle. "Okay, that's our cornerstone. But we need more. We need to show that this wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment, but a sustained campaign of neglect. I need you to sever any remaining financial ties you have with her. Credit cards, joint accounts, anything. We have to demonstrate that you are the sole stable provider and that she poses an active financial risk to the child." His advice solidified my next move. "And Marcus," he added, his tone serious, Go through his medical records. Every appointment, every prescription, every doctor's note. Look for anything she was responsible for that she missed. We need to build a wall of evidence so high she can't possibly climb over it. I found the documents in a box of files I kept in my car. Relics from a life that now seemed 100 years old. The agreement for our joint credit card. The one we'd used for groceries and gas. The paperwork for a small home equity loan we'd taken out for a new furnace 2 winters ago. All of it was a testament to a partnership that was now a toxic liability. I drove to her apartment building, my jaw set. I didn't buzz. I didn't text. I simply sat in the sleek, impersonal lobby, a space designed to impress visitors, and I waited. When the elevator doors finally slid open and she emerged, laughing at something Derek had just said, her smile vanished the moment she saw me. Derek's face hardened, his hand moving possessively to the small of her back. I didn't stand. I didn't raise my voice. I simply took the first document, the credit card agreement, and began tearing it into small, meticulous strips. I let the pieces fall to the polished marble floor. "Marcus, what the hell are you doing?" she demanded, her voice sharp with alarm as she took in the scene. I ignored her, picking up the loan agreement and beginning the same quiet, deliberate process of destruction. The small, ripping sounds were the only reply. I was dismantling our life together, piece by piece. She rushed forward, her heels clicking angrily on the floor. Derek remained by the elevator, watching with a wary, contemptuous expression. "Stop it! What is wrong with you? This is insane!" I continued my work, shredding the paper into a small mound of financial confetti at my feet. "You can't cut me out, Marcus," she said, her voice shifting from anger to a note of genuine panic. She was realizing this wasn't a dramatic gesture. It was a financial execution. Her access to my stability, my credit, my income was being publicly severed. I looked up at her then, my eyes cold and empty of the man she once knew. "Watch me," I said. The 2 words, spoken so quietly, held more power than a shout. A desperate, pleading look entered her eyes. It wasn't for Tommy, it wasn't for me. It was for her lifestyle, her safety net, which was currently being turned into trash on the floor of her lover's apartment building. "I'm still his mother," she insisted, falling back on the one title she thought was untouchable, the one claim she believed gave her indisputable rights. I paused, the final document held between my hands. I let the weight of her claim hang in the air for a moment before I delivered the final blow. "Mothers," I said, my voice clear and cutting, for her and for Derek and for the doorman who was pretending not to listen. "Don't abandon dying children for affairs." I left her there, standing amidst the scattered pieces of our broken contracts. I didn't look back. My next stop was the hospital cafeteria, a noisy, bustling place where I could be anonymous. I bought a coffee I didn't drink and claimed a small table in the corner. I pulled out the thick, 3-ring binder that contained Tommy's entire medical history, and, just as Bill had advised, I began to build my wall. For the next 2 hours, I was no longer a father. I was a forensic accountant of neglect. I cross-referenced the appointment calendar I had kept with the official visit summaries from the hospital. My gut had told me she was flaky, but the reality was a systematic abdication of her duties, a missed follow-up with the nutritionist in March, a rescheduled hematology consult in April that she never took him to, a routine blood draw in May that I had to race from work to cover at the last minute because she'd forgotten. The instances piled up. Then, I found the true pattern. I remembered the shared family calendar we used to keep online. I still had access. With a growing sense of dread, I pulled it up on my phone, placing it next to the medical binder. I started with the first missed appointment from 6 months ago, the reason listed on the calendar: Mom's trip. I scrolled through her public social media, a place I hadn't visited in months. There it was, a smiling photo of her and Derek, clinking glasses. The location tag, a trendy rooftop bar in Chicago. Derek's company had an office there. My blood ran cold. I kept digging. A missed physical therapy session for Tommy in June corresponded perfectly with a weekend getaway for her, tagged in the Florida Keys. A crucial meeting with the oncology team in July, which I'd had to attend alone via speakerphone from a work site, was the same week she'd posted photos from a relaxing work trip with Derek to San Diego. One by one, the pieces locked into place, forming a sickening mosaic of deceit. It wasn't just 18 missed appointments. It was 18 times she had chosen a vacation with her lover over a doctor's visit for her sick son. My hands were shaking as I dialed Bill's number. "I've got it," I said, my voice thick with rage. "It's all here. 18 times, Bill, 18 times she missed appointments. And I can prove that on every single one of those dates, she was on a trip with him." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. "My God," he finally said. "Marcus, this is the key. This is the irrefutable proof of sustained neglect in favor of her personal life. This changes everything." He was right. This evidence transformed the case from a messy domestic dispute into a clear-cut case of child endangerment. "The court has moved quickly on my emergency filing," Bill continued, his voice all business now. "The judge has scheduled the custody hearing. He wants to see you both in his chambers first thing tomorrow morning." I froze, my mind racing. Tomorrow. "Wait, what time tomorrow?" I asked, a new sense of dread creeping in. 8:30 a.m. sharp, Bill replied. My eyes darted to the scheduling board I had pinned inside the cover of Tommy's medical binder. My heart sank. There, in bold black marker, were the words I had written myself just that morning. "Final chemo round bridge to transplant, Friday, 8:30 a.m. The two most important events of my life. The fight to legally save my son and the treatment that would physically save him were scheduled for the exact same time. The choice was never a choice at all. It was an amputation. At 8 o'clock on Friday morning, I stood by Tommy's bed, my heart fracturing into 1,000 pieces. He was so small in the oversized bed, a port already accessed in his chest, his eyes wide with the familiar apprehension that preceded every treatment. The nurses bustled around him with a gentle efficiency that I was usually there to supplement, holding his hand, telling him a stupid story, promising him a new dinosaur toy when it was all over. But I couldn't stay. I couldn't be the one to see him through the initial terror of the chemo beginning its harsh work. I had to leave my son at the exact moment he needed me most to go fight a battle that would ensure he had a future to need me in. "Daddy has to go see a very important man," I whispered, my voice thick as I smoothed his hair. "It's about making sure we can fight the bad guys in your tummy for good. Dr. Chen and Nurse Ramirez are going to be right here, and I will be back before you can count to 100 million. He looked at me, his lower lip trembling. "But I want you, Daddy." Each word was a fresh wound. "I know, buddy. I want me too," I said, forcing a weak smile. I kissed his forehead, a long, lingering press, trying to pour all my love and strength and apologies into that single point of contact. Then I turned and walked away without looking back, because if I had, I never would have left. The family courthouse was a mausoleum of muted beige tones and hushed, anxious whispers. It smelled of stale coffee and bureaucratic indifference, a world away from the life and death urgency of the hospital ward I'd just abandoned. The tension in the air was a low-frequency hum, a collective vibration of broken families and shattered trust. My lawyer, Bill, a sturdy, no-nonsense man in a slightly rumpled suit, met me by the elevators. He clasped my shoulder, his grip firm. "You okay, Marcus?" I could only manage a nod, my mind still back in that hospital room. Good, because you're going to see a performance in there today. She's going to cry. She's going to talk about love and stress. She's going to try and paint you as the villain. Don't react. Don't give her the satisfaction. Look at the judge, look at me, look at the table. But don't look at her. Today she doesn't exist. There is only the evidence. Remember that. We walked into the judge's chambers, a wood-paneled room that felt more like a den of judgment than an office of law. Sarah was already there, seated at the opposite side of a large mahogany table. She was the very picture of maternal anguish. Her makeup was subtle, designed to highlight the dark circles under her eyes. She wore a conservative gray dress, and a small, delicate handkerchief was clutched in her hand. Her lawyer, a slick man with a practiced, sympathetic smile, was murmuring in her ear. She looked up as I entered, her eyes glistening with manufactured tears. The performance had already begun. The judge, a stern-faced man named Harrison, with tired eyes that had clearly seen every flavor of human deceit, began the proceedings. "I have reviewed the emergency motion filed by Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice a low rumble, "and the response from Miss Sarah. I will now hear brief arguments from both sides before I make my determination." Sarah's lawyer stood up, his movements smooth and theatrical. "Your Honor, what we have here is not a case of neglect, but a family buckling under the most immense pressure imaginable. My client, Miss Sarah, is a loving mother who has been grappling with the potential loss of her child. Yes, she has made mistakes. Her judgment has, at times, become clouded by the overwhelming emotional and financial stress. She has sought solace in a new relationship, a choice she regrets if it has caused her son any distress. But her love for Tommy has never wavered." He gestured toward Sarah, who dutifully produced a soft sob into her handkerchief. "Mr. Thorne, in his own grief, has become controlling, possessive, and financially manipulative. All my client asks is for the court to deny this punitive motion and allow her to be a full and equal partner in her son's recovery. She is not a monster. She is a mother who has been pushed to the brink." Sarah then spoke, her voice trembling but clear. "I love my son more than anything in this world, Your Honor," she said, looking directly at the judge. "I know I haven't been perfect. I've been scared. I made poor choices. But I'm ready to make it right. I just want to be there for him. Please don't take my son away from me." Bill let the silence hang for a moment after she finished before he stood. He held the thick binder of evidence. "Your Honor, love is not a feeling. It is an action. And the actions of Miss Sarah paint a very different picture from the one her attorney has just described." He turned to Sarah. "Miss Sarah, you testified that your judgment was clouded by financial stress. Is that correct?" "Yes," she whispered. "The bills were overwhelming." "Then can you explain," Bill continued, his voice hardening slightly, "why on May 15th you wired over $60,000, the entirety of the savings account designated for Tommy's medical care, not to the hospital but to the business account of your boyfriend, Derek?" Sarah's lawyer jumped to his feet. "Objection! My client's personal financial decisions are not relevant." "They are when they involve the direct theft of funds meant for the care of a minor child, counsel," Bill shot back. "Overruled," the judge grunted. "Answer the question, Miss Sarah." Sarah stammered. "It was an investment, a loan, to secure our future." I couldn't stop myself. The words erupted from me in a harsh, guttural whisper that cut across the room. "You loved Derek's money more." The judge's eyes snapped to me. "Mr. Thorne, one more outburst like that and you'll be waiting in the hall." I nodded, clenching my fists under the table. Bill pressed on, relentless. "Let's talk about another action. On July 11th, Tommy had a critical pre-treatment consultation with his entire oncology team. You were scheduled to attend. You did not. Marcus had to attend alone via speakerphone. Where were you, Miss Sarah? She looked at her lawyer, panic flashing in her eyes. I don't recall. I had a work obligation. Is that so? Bill said, pulling a sheaf of papers from his binder. Because this is a credit card receipt from your joint account, dated July 11th. It's for a couple's paradise massage and 2 margaritas at the poolside bar of the Azure Resort in Cabo San Lucas. Is this your signature? He placed the paper on the table in front of her. The room went silent. Sarah stared at her own signature as if it were a coiled snake. Marcus is manipulating things, she finally cried out, her voice cracking. He's twisting everything. The only thing being twisted here, Miss Sarah, is the truth, Bill said coldly. You chose a vacation in Cabo over your son's chemo appointments. While her lawyer tried to regroup, I took my own folder and stood up. I didn't say a word. I walked to the head of the table and slid a single document across the polished mahogany to Judge Harrison. It was the confirmation of the wire transfer from my 401k account to the hospital. The judge picked it up, his eyes scanning the page, lingering on the total amount. His expression, already grim, tightened. Bill provided the context. Your Honor, while Miss Sarah was enjoying massages in Cabo and draining their savings, Mr. Thorne was making a different choice. Yesterday, he liquidated his entire retirement account, every penny he has saved for his own future, to ensure that Tommy's treatment could begin this morning. The treatment that is happening right now as we speak, which Mr. Thorne is missing so he can be here to protect his son from the very woman who claims to love him. The contrast hung in the air, stark and damning. Sarah's lies versus my sacrifice. Her receipts for margaritas versus my receipt for my son's life. Judge Harrison placed the document down on the table. He looked at Sarah, and for the first time, the weariness in his eyes was replaced by a sharp, undisguised contempt. He didn't need to hear anything else. This court's primary and sole responsibility is the well-being of the child, Tommy Thorne, he began, his voice leaving no room for argument. It is clear from the evidence presented, not from the testimony, but from the undeniable, documented evidence that one parent has consistently and egregiously prioritized their own interests, while the other has made sacrifices I can only describe as absolute. He looked directly at me. Mr. Thorne, I am granting your motion. You will be awarded immediate, sole legal and physical custody of your son. A wave of relief, so profound, it almost buckled my knees, washed over me. It was over. I had won. He wasn't finished. He turned his steely gaze back to Sarah, who was now staring at him in shocked silence, her performance forgotten. Miss Sarah, your actions are appalling. They demonstrate a shocking lack of judgment and a disturbing level of parental indifference. Frankly, they border on the criminal. He leaned forward. You will have no contact with your son. However, I am a believer that even in the worst of cases, a child may one day need to know their mother. Therefore, I will not terminate your rights today, but I am ordering a full psychological evaluation at your expense. Pending the results of that evaluation, any and all visitation you may be granted in the future will be strictly and professionally supervised. Do you understand me? Bill clapped me on the back, a solid grounding gesture that pulled me from the haze of the judge's final words. He'll be okay, Marcus, he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. You did it. Now go. Go be with your son. I nodded, a jerky, disconnected movement. I felt hollowed out, scoured clean by the ordeal. The victory didn't feel like a rush of adrenaline. It was a slow, deep, quiet exhale I felt like I'd been holding for a year. We walked out of the judge's chambers and back into the beige hallway. The heavy wooden door began to swing shut behind us, a final barrier between my new reality and the wreckage I was leaving behind. Just before it latched, her voice, stripped of all its artifice and venom, slipped through the narrowing gap. "Marcus." It cracked on my name, a sound of pure, unadulterated panic. It wasn't a demand or a threat. It was the terrified cry of someone who had just realized the floor had vanished from beneath her feet. For a single, fleeting heartbeat, I paused. Every instinct, every shred of history, every ghost of the woman I once loved urged me to turn around. But I didn't. I kept my eyes fixed on the exit sign at the end of the hall, that glowing red promise of escape. I listened as the heavy door clicked shut, the sound definitive and absolute, sealing her in with her choices. Then I walked away. 6 months later, the sun was warm on my face, and the air smelled of salt and sunscreen. The only sterile beeping sounds were from a distant ice cream truck. I sat on a blanket on the sand, watching Tommy. His hair, once thin and patchy, had grown back into a thick, unruly mop that flopped into his eyes when he laughed. He was a whirlwind of frantic 5-year-old energy, digging a massive, complicated trench around a lopsided sandcastle. He was using a bright yellow shovel to wage a joyous one-boy war against the incoming tide, shrieking with delight each time a wave breached his defenses and sent water rushing into his moat. His doctors had declared him in full, complete remission a month ago. The transplant had been a brutal, terrifying success. And here he was, healthy and whole, covered in sand and alive. So incredibly, miraculously alive. My life was a quiet routine of kindergarten drop-offs, doctor checkups that were now blessedly boring, and rediscovering the simple joy of my son's presence. Sarah's life, from what I could gather through the occasional misdirected piece of mail or a terse email from her attorney regarding the terms of her impending supervised visitation, had unraveled in the most predictable of ways. Derek, the man for whom she had torched her entire world, had vanished the moment her credit cards were declined, and the well of my liquidated 401k had run dry. He'd left behind a string of maxed-out accounts and a forwarding address that led nowhere. The bank had eventually foreclosed on the apartment she couldn't afford on her own, and the official bankruptcy notices, according to her lawyer, were now piling up at her parents' house like autumn leaves. A small, petty part of me should have relished it, but I felt nothing beyond a distant, clinical pity. My revenge was never about her destruction. It was about Tommy's survival. Just then, he forgot about his castle and sprinted across the sand to tackle me, sending us both tumbling onto the blanket in a flurry of limbs and laughter. And I heard it. A sound I thought had been stolen from us forever. It was a true laugh, deep and from the belly, unburdened by pain or fear. It was the sound of pure, uncomplicated happiness. I held him tight, the sound washing over me, knowing with absolute certainty that some of life's greatest battles don't end with the thunder of loud revenge, but with the quiet victory of a child's laughter against the roar of the ocean. As I watched him run back to his castle, a thought settled over me, as calm and clear as the blue sky above. I could have dragged the fight on for years, burying her in legal fees, tormenting her with every victory, making her suffer in the same way she had made us suffer. I could have dedicated myself to her ruin, but my energy was a finite resource, and Tommy needed all of it. In the end, the most profound punishment I could have ever delivered was not an act of aggression, but one of disappearance. I had walked out of that courthouse, out of her life, and had taken with me the one thing she truly could not live without. Not the money, not the stability, but the validation of my attention. I had left her alone in the quiet, empty room of her own consequences. Sometimes the best punishment, the only real justice, is simply walking away.